This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, B-E-T-A, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX. What is up, Wildcatters? Welcome back to another episode of the Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. Today I got my buddy Matt Elbert with Tachyus. Sorry guys, I had way too much coffee this morning and I'm having a hard time articulating what I am thinking. But Matt, you're here in Houston. You're CFO, CRO at Tachyus. I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about Tachyus and sort of how it's changed since the last time we were on the show.
Yeah, we had you guys on the podcast 3-4 years ago, and so I'm sure a ton has changed. But really quickly, for anybody who's listening who is not familiar with you guys, high level, like what is it that you guys do?
Sure. So Tachyus has two main verticals. One is focused on using data physics to basically operationalize reservoir simulation in a way that hasn't been done before, insofar as looking at building models in days or weeks as opposed to months or longer for secondary and tertiary oil production. So think like water flood, steam flood, CO2 flood, polymer flood, where we're able to build a model very quickly. You're able to then use that model to run a bunch of, what if scenarios. What if my injector shuts in? What if I change my injection rates across my different injectors? And then ultimately get to an optimization. We've published a bunch of SPE papers and EAGE papers with our clients, where we show anywhere between a 5 to 15% increase in oil production, and in some cases even a 5 to 15% increase in reservoirs as well, based on the sweep of the water flood. So that's our core or fundamental vertical. I would say it's our flagship product. It's how the company was founded. It's what's been around for a long time. Concept behind it was always to bring AI to the oil and gas industry. And I think, I'm sure you'll agree, the industry's gotten better in the last decade. We're still not aerospace or defense, but we are better than we were.
So we're significantly better in the last 5 months, and even particularly in the last 6 months.
No.
5 years in the last 6 months.
And it's funny because, we've been doing AI for a decade, but, November comes around, ChatGPT is out. And I start talking to customers like, hey, you guys do AI? Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, like ChatGPT? not quite, but is it free? No, not free. So there's that. And then the other vertical we've got is we have a greenhouse gas product. We call it Orion. And, there's a lot of products out there today that track emissions in some form or fashion. And we do that too, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And we've sort of productized the EPA reporting, if that's your thing. We've sort of turned in EPA reporting, we've turned it into TurboTax, which I think is really helpful because today there's a cottage industry of companies out there, mostly consultants that, come January 1, they hire a consulting firm to come in, the E&P does, and hey, they spend 3 months figuring out what the emissions were and they report it. Because if you emit more than 25,000 metric ton, independent of industry, you have to report to the EPA. 20-odd% of that's oil and gas. The rest is things like, manufacturing, construction, agriculture. You get the point. Waste management. So we've made that process a lot easier. But really the thesis behind the product is today companies have teams of people that monitor daily production and they forecast out future production. We believe, for regulatory reasons or otherwise, soon enough, companies will have teams of people that monitor daily emissions and forecast out future emissions. And Orion lets them do that, and it's a software-only solution. And it's cool because you think about it from a field development planning perspective, and that's what excites me. So, that's sort of what the two main verticals the company has. The main change, and I have a lot of respect for the guys who started Tachyus, and frankly, a lot of gratitude because I have a job because they were able to go out and raise a bunch of money on a good idea. That said, in late 2020, Fernando Gutierrez, who's our CEO, took over. And when he took over, we had one client on an expiring contract and basically no revenue. And I'm not making that up, like literally no revenue. I mean, part of that was COVID related, in fairness, and part of that was just some challenges that we'd had. And Fernando came in and said, look, let's just take a step back here and think about who we are as a company. We're not a product-based company. We need to be a sales-based company. And Fernando, like most of us, come out of Schlumberger or SLB. And so, we're service company guys with a service company focus, and we've really tailored our business to deliver for our customers. And as a result of that, now we have dozens of customers and, lots of revenue. We always want more revenue, don't get me wrong, but we've grown the business at over 100% a year every year, and we're well into the 7 figures at this point. And we're continuing to grow, and our outlooks are really positive. But I think that's the main change, is that we went from being run by folks that were super bright and really understood the technology space and the, call it Silicon Valley space, to folks who come out of the oil and gas space and have sold software to oil companies. And we moved our headquarters from the Bay Area to Houston because this is where our clients are. And so, the CTO, Dr. Pallav Sarma, is a PhD out of Stanford and basically, reservoir engineering, petroleum engineering, operational engineering, whatever you want to call it. Operations management, I think, is technically what it's called. Is one of the guys that was around from the beginning. But apart from Pallav, it's mostly folks that were maybe already in Tachyus, but weren't at a senior management level. And I think that's been the big change and something that I'm really proud of. One thing we didn't have before was the Orion product. We didn't have a greenhouse gas product at all. And we're not political folks, but when the new administration came on, we thought, well, oil and gas might go from being the redheaded stepchild to kicked right out the family. Because, the new administration in 2021 was talking about, energy transition and getting rid of everybody entirely in the oil and gas space. And it's somewhat ironic because, oil and gas accounts for 42% of global emissions or something like that. So just kicking it to the curb and not wanting to work on improving it didn't make a whole lot of sense to us. I mean, sure, we're biased. We're oil and gas guys. But when I look around any room I'm sitting in, most of the things in the room are hydrocarbon. So the notion that it's going away in the next 2 years, look, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem overly likely, let's say. Yeah. And so we wanted to come up with sort of a pragmatic approach to the energy transition. And look, our flagship products, they help companies to reduce the amount of water that they're pumping downhole, or the amount of steam, or the amount of CO2. It helps them to increase their production and their reserves. And, you think about what is the highest emitting part of upstream oil and gas? Well, it's drilling. So if I can get more oil out of an existing reservoir without having to drill a new well, that actually has a material impact on emissions. And then as we built out the greenhouse gas product Orion, we did it in conjunction with our clients. And what we found is basically that the product developed sort of 3 modes. The first mode is the other products out there in this space were not built for oil and gas. So there's plenty of products out there that do stuff, and I'm sure a lot of them are good, but the guys running it don't know the difference between a mandrel and a manifold. And that can be challenging, right? If you don't understand the pieces of equipment that are in the field and how it's used. And then we built a data management sort of mesh where we can sort of map into whatever the company's production system is. So, WellView, SiteView, EnerSite, Peloton, SAP, Oracle, pull out all the data, and then we can auto-populate this product we've got, which allows you to do things like, report to the EPA with a lot more simplicity. We also then have that field development side of forecasting. And today, when oil and gas companies forecast emissions, it's something like this. They say, well, last year I had 50,000 barrel a day production, and I had 100,000 metric ton of emission. Well, this year I'm going to have 60,000 barrel a day production, so it's going to be 120,000 metric ton of emission. And maybe that's right, and maybe it's not, but it doesn't give you any tangible way that you can make decisions to reduce your carbon intensity or your methane intensity, your methane footprint, your carbon footprint, whatever. What we focused on was helping companies to say, going to a really granular level. So think like facility, like well pad or single well battery, or even to the component level if they're so inclined, and be able to say things like, what if I took 100 pneumatics and I went from low bleed devices to high bleed devices, or I went from high bleed to no bleed? What does that do to my emissions? What if I electrify my fleet? Look, I know that my CO2 is coming from my flare stack, and I know that my methane is coming from my pneumatics or my combustion equipment. But what combustion equipment and which flare stacks? Maybe I don't know that.
So this isn't just, I'm gonna just quantify exactly what my emissions are. This is more like modeling to say, if I do this, this is the outcome from that, so that you can accurately project what your emissions are going to be.
That is exactly right. So we look at things like, what if I drill 100 new wells? What does that do? What if I buy an asset? What if I divest an asset? So if you're in,
it is a big consideration on the M&A side now.
Right. It's exactly right. So if you think, if you're at a big PE shop and you're thinking about, multiple different plays that you could invest in, maybe you're going to look at the one in the Utica instead of the Bakken because the Utica has a lot less emissions. Maybe you're not. I mean, the economics have to work out. And that goes back to the underlying sort of thesis around Tachyus, which is everything we do is focused on the economics and helping companies to make profitable decisions. I mean, that we want companies to maximize profits because we believe that the only way that we're actually going to see this, impact from, reducing emissions, et cetera, is by making profitable decisions. Look, again, maybe everyone likes a pie in the sky, right? And it'd be great if cold fusion comes tomorrow and everything goes away. I don't see it. So what can we do in the meantime to have a real impact? And so, the other cool thing I would say is that our flagship products we call Akin, which again is water flood and steam flood and CO2 flood. It's a complicated thing. I mean, you need to be a reservoir really engineer or have years of experience with reservoir models and simulators to understand data physics and really get into it. And, Dr. Sarma created this thing, and frankly, he's a lot smarter than me. I came up through the oil and gas industry. I spent years at SLB and then Enbridge. So I've got almost 20 years in the industry. A lot of that time was spent in the field. I understand what's going on at the subsurface. I still am not one of the people who's running this tool. However, on the greenhouse gas side, even little old me can figure out how to run it. And I think that's a cool thing, right? We've built something that's usable for anybody. You don't need to be a super smart engineer, which is great because I'm not a super smart engineer, right? So it's great.
So I know that's obviously one of the hottest topics right now. And, I've had a lot of conversations with E&Ps recently that are focused on that. And they're really trying to wrap their heads around this space, right? There's just a lot of new things that are popping up. Tools like you guys. There's also like third-party, certifications and ratings. And then you look at the actual technology like in the field, from detection to quantification to what y'all doing with like forecasting. It's a lot, and it's a lot to really kind of feel like, how do you build like your emissions tech stack, right? So with y'all, so imagine like, say I'm an E&P quarterly operating and I'm using this. Is it like, how much work goes into like setting that up? Because I feel like you're having to, because you're talking about individual devices and pieces of equipment and stuff at every individual site. So like, is it a crazy kind of like onboarding process?
No, it's a great question.
Get that set up?
No, it's a great question, and one that we deal with generally. So a bit of a longer answer to a short question is, one of the biggest challenges that any software company in any industry has is getting the data and getting access to the data. And oftentimes the challenge is that the data is just not easily accessible. It's not just all one Excel file somewhere, right? It's going to be in, multiple business systems. It's going to be on an Excel file on someone's laptop in Lafayette, Louisiana. And like, some of it's in somebody's brain. Like, how do you get to all that? What I can tell you, we've got clients that are, smaller operators. We've got mid-size operators, and we've got, multi-billion-dollar E&Ps that are using this platform. Nobody's got pristine data. Nobody.
I can confirm that.
Yeah. So that's the first fear that we run into with people. It's like, well, I'm not sure our data is good enough yet for this. And it's a totally valid concern.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what we say is, look, you're right. You probably don't have great data, but there's a couple of things. First of all, we've gotten pretty good at this because we've built everything out on the same stack that we use on the reservoir simulation side or the data physics side. Keep in mind that that's a lot more data. You're talking about 5, 10, 15, 50 years worth of production history that we run through these simulators, right? To build these models out. So we're really, really good at data management and optimization. That's our core business. We've been doing it for a decade. That's what we use the machine learning and the artificial intelligence to do. We honor the physics. We use machine learning. That's what we do on the reservoir side. On the greenhouse gas side, we take that same expertise and the same machine learning models that we've built, and we figured out a way to get to the customer data. So to answer your question, it's not an overnight sensation. We don't just turn it on. But we've got a client, I think one of our more recent ones, we did about 4,000 facilities in about 8 weeks.
Damn.
So we figured out a way to get it done, but that goes back to that proprietary data mesh we built. We'll sit down in the client's office and we go and say, hey, let's map this out. The cool thing is, it's not as if we say to the client, hey, here's an Excel file, we need you to populate this, because that's just a pain in the neck. And nobody wants to do that. Instead, we say, listen, we understand that you probably have your data across 5 or 6 different business systems. However it flows, send it to us. We'll clean it up. We understand. We have a team of guys that are data scientists that really understand this. They've gotten good at it. And no matter how it comes in whatever disparate form, we'll set it up, connect it, and then Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. And then you're actually able to get your emissions on demand. And so we can either connect directly to your business system, or if some IT tyrant says that's never going to happen, then guess what? We can use a third-party FTP, and at least from our experience, that's generally okay. And we got, we're type 2 SOC 2 compliance and all those fancy things.
How are they tracking or getting the data on emissions specifically today? Right. So regardless of wherever it's living, what is the original source for that you guys are seeing with these companies?
So most of them use consultants.
Okay.
So the EPA reporting deadline in the US is March 31st. And so what happens is come January, they'll hire a consulting firm. They'll pay the guy, I don't know, anywhere between 15 and 500 grand, depending on the size of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And the consultant will spend 3 months going around and tracking, the pneumatics and the flare stacks. And the EPA has emission factors that they've assigned to pieces of equipment. So, your run hours on a compressor, or the amount of flaring that you did. And they say, okay, well, if you ran it for this period of time, your emissions was X. Or if you flared this amount, your emissions was Y. And everybody, including the EPA, knows that that isn't right. But frankly, it's a fair way of doing it because it, levels the playing field and it makes some level of reporting possible. Now, the EPA is actually somewhat, I would say that the emission factors they've established are good enough for government. But in what is not normal about government here is that they've said, if you've got different emission factors, you can use your own so long as you explain them. And some companies do. They've come up with their own emission factors because they say, look, the EPA doesn't differentiate between a pneumatic that's 10 years old with no maintenance on it versus one I bought yesterday. And that certainly has a different emissions profile. So they start coming up with their own. Or you've got some really cool companies out there that are doing, continuous monitoring. I'm sure Project Canary comes to mind, where they've got continuous monitoring on location, et cetera. What's cool about Orion is, and I know the word is a bit played out. I understand that in the software space.
Orion is?
No, the word platform.
Platform. I was like...
No, Orion's not. Or at least I hope not. But the word platform is. And we really did, though, build a platform. Insofar as, by that I mean, we're agnostic. If you want to use the EPA emission factors, that's the default. But if you're overseas, you don't care about the EPA, and that's too strong. You may not want the EPA. Maybe you want the API compendium, which we also have in there. Or maybe you've got your own emission factors. We've got a custom model set up so you can pull in your own emission factors. Or if you've got continuous monitoring on location, whether that's a Canary or a Bridger or some other company, all that data can come in, and then you can visualize it, model it, you can export all of it very easily. It's all on an open data layer to a Power BI or a Spotify or a Tableau or even Excel, whatever you've got.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it way easier from the data side. We'll spend, anywhere between 2 weeks to maybe 2 to 3 months doing all of the implementation. We do it. We don't throw it onto the company. And then from there, it's set. And once it's set, companies can get their data as often as they want. And so the data will generally come at that point from a production system. To go back to your question of where it comes from today, the consultant will go around and collect it, oftentimes by doing physical counts of equipment, looking at production, et cetera, et cetera.
It's wild to me that that's like all done by consultants. I mean, it makes sense, but it's like, it's wild to me that that's
80+% of E&Ps are using consultants.
That's crazy.
But because, again, if you're being completely candid about the whole thing, as we sit here today on, what's the date? I don't even know the date.
I don't know, 25th, I think?
The 20th.
I got it right.
That's right, the 25th of August in 2023. There isn't a carbon tax in the majority of the United States, like California notwithstanding. Methane's coming, but it's not here today. You've had to report, though, to the EPA for some time. Well, what's the easiest way to get this done? Like without dedicating, a full-time equivalent doing this or hiring somebody, you can pay a third party to do it. And that makes sense, And so what we've done, though, is what we started to see are companies that some were ahead of the curve. Some simply wanted a software solution instead of hiring a consultant. Great. Like I said, we got TurboTax there. But some were slightly ahead of the curve as well, and thinking about things like, well, there's a methane tax coming around the corner here. We know it's coming. The administration said this is what it's going to be. We need to think about, as we make decisions, what does that look like? And what you're able to do with Orion is sort of model out, your 2023 emissions versus the 2024 proposed rule changes. I mean, we even took the SEC stuff that was supposed to come out last October and will be out this October allegedly,
Mm-hmm.
and we productized it. We went through the whole 400-page document and put it. I don't have any clients using it because it doesn't technically exist yet, but it's there because it's coming around the corner.
You do the same thing for the IRA and the implications for E&Ps?
Yeah, everything. So we've thought through all this and tried to make it as easy as possible for E&Ps or majors or just mom and pops, service companies. We actually have some midstream operators. We actually have a construction company. We built it for the oil and gas industry, but the construction company was like, hey, I can use this, from a marketing perspective. So it's pretty cool, and it's done well. And as far as like from a sales cycle goes, it's a lot faster. The reservoir product is really impressive in what its capabilities are. But it takes a long time to meet with engineers and go through it. And reservoir engineers are notoriously complicated people to sell into because they're really, really smart. And they want to spend a lot of time understanding every in, out, and what have you on any product they're looking at, which makes sense, especially when you're talking about, an asset that's worth oftentimes hundreds of millions of dollars that they're going to start making adjustments to in the field. If you're going to run a slick line unit out there to change the valve, like you want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And so it makes sense. On the greenhouse gas side, though, first of all, the price point is so much lower. It's oftentimes right with, we don't really have budgetary issues with it. We've tried to put it in a place that,
just makes sense.
Easy. You're not stuck.
Not the first thing that gets cut whenever they have budget cuts.
No, and again, maybe being overly, I am the head of sales, but I'm not a very good sales guy because I came up through finance, if that tells you anything. But our secret sauce, if you will, is just to get into the workflow. The product works well. We've gotten really positive feedback on it. We've been doing it now for several years. The only clients we no longer have, ones that, churn or whatever you want to call them, are ones that got bought by bigger companies.
Mm-hmm.
And those companies we're trying to talk to. And, it's tough to get into some of the biggest companies in the world. So, it's always good when clients don't fire you. That's generally a positive when they renew.
Yeah, it's typically a good positive signal.
Generally a positive thing. So that's how we've worked it so far. And, it's something that I think we're all really proud of because we built it from whole cloth. In fact, we had at a conference here in Houston a few months back, I think it was May, the carbon conference, we had one of our clients, Denbury, stand up on stage and said, look, this is the product the oil and gas industry needs, which isn't shocking because they played a pretty crucial role in helping us build it out to get all the things that were necessary. And we spent a lot of time and money building this product out for operators.
And then hopefully, if Exxon buys them, you guys can get into Exxon and expand through there.
Hey, from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, let's. I'm curious on the EOR side. So a couple questions. Let's just kind of talk macro. What do you believe is like the TAM of like EOR operators?
Well, I think today something around 60 to 65% of world oil is still produced using some EOR methodology, most of which is water flood. Okay. So if you assume there's,
that's much higher than I expected.
Yeah. 90 something million barrels a day is your daily production.
What about here in the States?
Lower. Considerably. But you still have some big ones.
Yeah. Chevron, Oxy, a couple other places. Yeah.
So Oxy is really big in,
bunch of steam floods out in California.
And there's steam floods out in California. Bakersfield's a big one. You've got Imperial up in Canada with Exxon. But Conoco is, we put out a press release with them a little under a year ago. They're a large client of ours, and they've got some really big water floods, and they've got some WAG, some water alternating gas as well here in the U.S. I mean, in the U.S. you hear a lot about frack, right? Particularly shale, and so you're not generally going to use a water flood in shale, and water flood doesn't work for gas.
Yeah.
But globally, and most of our revenue on the EOR side does come from outside the United States as a result. Even if the company's based here, their asset may be outside the United States. It's still significant. We've a fair bit of revenue come from the Middle East and Latin America. In fact, we put out an SPE paper, one of our coolest success stories. There's a company called Pan American Energy out of Argentina. It's a BP joint venture with an Argentine company. And they saw a 15% increase in both production and reserves. And so if you think about that for a moment, this is a software solution. Their ROI was the equivalent of drilling multiple wells just by using software.
And if you're showing that the reserves have more than what you had originally anticipated, for one, the company valuation goes up, your borrowing capacity for
massive.
There's a lot of implications for that.
Granted, this was a really complicated field. You're talking like 80 something layers or something like that. I don't remember exactly. It's all in the SPE paper, but doing the sweep that we were able to do with the water flood, it showed, wow, this is oil that we didn't think was accessible that actually is accessible. So it's recoverable reserve, and it increased. So that was really cool. So we've published a bunch of papers. Overall TAM, you'll catch me lying here. I want to say that when these guys pitched the company 10 years ago, it was something like $200 billion that was still accessible for water flood.
It's a lot.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
I would gladly take 1% of that. I don't think I'd be thrilled, tickled pink.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think EORs. I think there's going to be a lot of people refocusing on that. As I've talked about this a billion times, people are probably tired of hearing this, but we're not discovering a new Permian here in the States anytime soon. And so with that, but then also on the completion side with like refracs and stuff, like it's getting more out of what we've already drilled.
So I think that's a really, really important concept for people to sort of to wrap their heads around, because no, you're certainly not going to go discover a new Permian. I mean, I don't believe.
Yeah.
But also there's an enormous amount of cost that goes into drilling.
And risk.
That's exactly right. And there's, a lot less cost and risk in getting more out of what you've already got. I mean, one of the old sayings in our industry is, where's the best place to find oil? Where you've already found oil.
Yeah.
So, like one of the things that Akin does is it helps with infill drilling. like where's the next hole you should poke in the ground? We'll tell you that. The technology allows you to use the data physics to really understand the reservoir in ways that today, I think, classic, simulators, numerical, streamline, whatever, don't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that when it comes to just the sheer size of the industry and the amount of existing oil fields, sure, you can go and spend millions of dollars on licenses for classic simulators from, the likes of SLB or CMG, Landmark at Halliburton, whatever. And that makes sense, especially if you're going to drill, a couple $100 million, pop a couple of holes in the Gulf. Like you probably do want to have a 4D model in it, If you've got a field that's been producing for 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
you need to spend a year with millions of dollars on a reservoir simulator? I don't think so.
You just made me have a question that I've never really thought about before. Does EOR exist offshore?
Sure, absolutely.
Tell me more. I have never thought about that before.
Yeah, no, I mean, some of our most successful projects right now are offshore. We're operating in the largest offshore field in China, and
Okay.
had really, really good success there. Our technology, again, to be frank, is best suited when there are more wells, not less. So the challenge with a technology like ours offshore would be, let's say you've got, 3 wells off the platform and 1 injector. Well, there's not a whole lot to optimize. I mean, the best way to describe it would be to think about, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. Okay, so let's say you've got a 10-story building, okay? And you say, how many people in the building? I say, well, there's 1,000. And you say, okay, well, 1,000 people, how many of them are women? Okay. 400. Okay, well, how many of those 400 women are managers? 200. How many of those women managers are on the 3rd floor? 10. How many of those women managers on the 3rd floor are above the age of 65? 2. Okay, well, you've narrowed it down to a point where there's so many constraints on what we're trying to do that there's only so much we can do. You only have, what our technology does is it allows us to sit there and look at all the different wells and how they communicate with one another and, make recommendations, or you can, as you use the technology yourself, you'll be able to run simulations or run different scenarios, a better word, to say what happens if you change injection rates here or shut off this injector there, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you only have 1 injector or 2 injectors, or there's 20 total wells, there's just so many constraints on it that we can't do much. Whereas if it's a field that's got a lot more wells, we can do more. So that's the one area, at least as it relates to our technology offshore, that becomes a challenge if it's a field that doesn't have a lot of wells in it. Now, there are some huge fields offshore with tons of wells, and then we're very successful.
Yeah, that's wild to think about. Yeah, I think offshore is absolutely fascinating to me. I just think, you're just talking about, it's big money, it's big volumes of production. Yeah, you've got some companies that are very substantial in terms of like valuation and production numbers with a very small number of wells.
Yes.
Like we're talking like 12 wells, but these 12 wells produce a shit ton.
Yeah, listen, there are some extremely prolific oil fields that have a very small number of wells offshore. Some of these things will produce massive amounts of oil on a day rate. No question about it. And that's awesome. And then they should buy our Orion product so they can track their emissions. That's independent of the number of wells, right? But yeah, I think on the EOR side, offshore, onshore, as long as we'll tell the client that, and we'll sit down and look at what they've got and try and make an honest assessment of, look, is our technology right for this field? And we've told people no before. Look, we had a client in the Middle East a few years back say, look, this is a dead oil field. We want to use your technology to see if it's alive. And we're like, no, but dead oil field. We don't think it's going to be alive. And they're like, no, we want you to do it. So we debated internally. Said, well, we'll try. And what was our outcome? It's a dead field. I mean, there was no. We're not magicians. We don't claim to be. We're not. One of the big changes in the company, to go back what I said a few minutes ago, is that we're not charismatic founders that can go, sell you the moon, the earth, and the stars. We're operators. We're trying to run a profitable business that delivers a product of value in a way that makes our customers happy. That's really our main focus. And by and large, I think we're pretty successful with that. I mean, at the same time, as I'm sure you know from other people you talk to and your time in the industry, there's no guarantees in this business. I had a client say to me a few weeks back, we were talking about renewing the EOR side, and he says, "Now we're going to go run these suggestions, that you guys came up with, the recommendations, change rates here, there for a CO2 flood. Can you guarantee me they'll work?" I mean,
there's no guarantees in this space.
I was like, come on, man. Like, you ever drill a dry well? I mean, like, this is geology. Like, can I guarantee you? No. I mean, we think it's a high probability it'll work. Yes. But what's the other nice thing about our EOR product is that it doesn't require a bunch of, well logs and all the geology and all that stuff. We could do a lot with, your production history, some pressure data, maybe a lat long here or there. But we can do a lot with that. And I think that makes it easier for the clients as well, because we don't need you to go and spend a week pulling data for us.
Yeah.
That isn't helpful, right? Give me an hour of your time, maybe 2 if we're looking at 20 plus years. But generally 7 to 10 to 12 years is enough data on the EOR side.
Yeah.
So
before we wrap up, what's the future hold for you guys?
Ah, man, I mean,
it's a great opening question.
I know, right? Let's be the biggest company on the planet. I don't know. I mean, no, I think, like I said, we're operators. We want to keep on growing the business steadily. We want to keep on doubling revenue on an annualized basis. And most importantly, we want to keep on giving customers what they want. I mean, as far as Orion goes, I think we can expand beyond oil and gas. I mean, I think the TAM on Orion by itself is, by 2026, probably 10 billion. If you ask CNBC, they would tell you it's 3 or 4 times that, but in my own little way, I do math, it came up to about 10, and that's just in the next 3 years. In the Akin space, on the EOR side, I think it's also super, super large, because most of our clients were only in either one of their fields or a part of several of their fields, and the expansion capabilities are just massive there. And that's what we're trying to do, is to continue to just, and we're being pretty successful with that by selling into a company and then selling more products to that company and expanding. And maybe that's sort of like the old Schlumberger way, or maybe the new SLB way, I don't know, but we've taken that approach and it's been successful. I mean, I think, from a growth perspective, we're on track. We obviously want to grow more, and we'll continue to do it.
Love it, man. Dude, this has been a great conversation on the mic, and then enjoyed the chat beforehand.
Yeah.
If people want to reach out, I'm assuming Tachyus.com.
Yeah, Tachyus.com. Get me at Matt@Tachyus.com will work. Info@Tachyus.com. Any way you want to go. But yeah, we're
perfect. Love it, man. And it's been great to kind of catch up and learn more about, new management has come in, really a new vision for the company, but also, the new products on the G&G side. So it's exciting.
Well, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Absolutely, man. If you guys like the episode, take 2 seconds, leave a rating, review, share with your friends. We'll catch you guys in the next one.